And today we're going to have an incredible conversation with Stella Ickes, who is a community engagement officer and animal control officer at Pasco County in Pasco County, Florida. We're going to be talking about her favorite topic, how to handle large cat situations, conversation that we're going to have here. And just to tell you a little bit more about Stella, Stella turned her lifelong passion for animals into a career in 1996 at the Farmingville Animal Hospital in New York, where she worked as a veterinary assistant kennel manager for 10 years. After moving to Florida in 2012, she realized she missed the industry and started volunteering in the veterinary department of Pasco County Animal Services. She was soon offered a position as an animal care technician, which gave her firsthand experience with the plight of homeless animals in the community. By 2016, Stella's passion for helping both pets and people caught the attention of the organization's field services supervisor, who encouraged her to train as an animal control officer. She is now a certified animal control officer in addition to being certified in humane euthanasia. She has served as community engagement officer and on PCAS's Community Engagement Committee, which processes requests for the Pet Safety Net program. In 2021, Stella was named Animal Control Officer of the Year by the Florida Animal Control Association. She was the lead officer in charge of a recent grant to trap, neuter, vaccinate, and return 600 cats in a high-volume community, driving the effort to completion within 2 months. She's identified many hoarding cases and worked with overwhelmed caregivers to find sterilization and placement opportunities, as well as any counseling or other resources needed. In addition, she assists with presentations to local neighborhood associations and civic organizations. Stella has 6 pets of her own, 4 feisty dachshunds, her favorite breed, a giant lovable Rottweiler, and a beautiful 3-legged calico cat. Stella, I was just going to say, welcome to the show. I feel like I'm doing a podcast.
Close enough, right?
I know. Welcome to the online cat conference. We're going to have this incredible conversation around large cat situations. And, when we say large cat situations, what really, what do we mean? How do you define? There's like a hoarding. What does hoarding? Everybody goes, oh, it's a hoarding situation. The other day I had somebody say, oh, we have a hoarding situation. Let's get all serious. And it was like 12 cats and they don't have URI. And I was like, well, that sounds like 12 cats that need spay neuter assistance. So how do you define like a hoarding situation or large cat? What are the words that you use when you're thinking of these scenarios?
Well, and I think hoarding situations or the hoarding word gets tossed around conveniently because we see maybe an overloaded, a larger number of animals than what you would consider to be normal. In our county, 9 is the limit for a household. So you could live on a small little plot of land and have 9 animals. You could have 5 acres and have 9 animals. And both of those are, in our eyes, acceptable. But in the terms of, maybe what you can do when it comes to your sanitation, your nutrition, your veterinary care, socialization of the animal and the person. So it all depends upon what they're able to sustain, in my eyes, but regarding those kinds of, out here in Florida, we have indoor outdoor cat scenario. So that is where the lines can be blurred easily because folks will be like, they're outdoor cats or they're outdoor indoor cats, but they're not my cats. They just come in. So it all depends upon, we've gone to some houses in cases that they have over the number of animals that they're supposed to, but they're able to sustain them in a healthy, manageable rate. Then you have the other cases where people aren't even sure how many animals they have in the home, and it becomes just something they don't have the food for them or the veterinary care, things like that. So that plays a big part on determining what the needs are. But our large hoarding cases can be anywhere from 50, 60 cats and up. And it's not always cats only. It's a mixture of cats, dogs, livestock, it's a variety. So it's a case by case basis for me personally, and I think for our agency also. But we also have those ordinances that keep those boundaries on it. So it helps us to be able to be enforcement sided when we need to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would also look at it from a mental health standpoint. So, you go in there and there's 50 cats and there's 200 shampoo bottles, right? Or something like that. So that, it's looking at also the human behavior side of things, how the person is living and trying to understand that scenario also, rather than being like, I'm always like saying, okay, well, let's find the person who really wants to do right for the cats. They just don't have access to the resources that they need. So somebody with 6 unspayed cats could very easily become a hoarder within 12 months. If those 6 unspayed cats all had 2 to 3 litters in the course of the year, there you go. And that's a person who, at the point where they had the 6 unspayed cats, didn't realize that they really need to be active in finding a solution, spay neuter solution for those cats right at that. There's this like the golden opportunity moment where if those 6 cats went into the vet and got spayed and neutered, they wouldn't have that journey. But a lot of people don't realize that it's really pretty urgent at that point in time, especially if obviously if those cats are going out, those 6 cats get themselves spayed right away. And so it's sort of connecting those dots where I think a lot of people don't know. I mean, our Merrimack River Feline Rescue Society, so many years ago, I mean, they had an 80 cat hoarding situation. The gentleman lived like about a mile or two down the road from the shelter, and you were like, well, like, where did we miss this memo? I mean, like, where, and we were blaming ourselves for this situation, because what was it that we didn't do to get the message to him that, we could have helped him very earlier on in the process. And that's sort of, one of the things. I'm sure you have a list of your friends and family plan of folks that you like to stay in touch with.
Right, right. And you hit on a really good point there when you said, this was a mile or so down from the shelter. Sometimes, and I've noticed this, and it's can be a sensitive subject, but as somebody who works in our local municipal shelter, sometimes when we have our rescue groups and they are taking in cats hand over fist because we have kitten season, and then the next thing we're maybe getting a call that a hoarding scenario is being created, and we as an agency, we're looking to get them out of the shelter so they're not going to get sick. They're going to go into an adoption environment, or so we hope. But sometimes these rescue groups, they're thinking with their heart rather than the logical side of things, and then the next thing they do look around and they start saying, how did this happen? And it's because, again, when we're animal lovers, we sometimes have a hard time saying no. And when you're labeled a rescue, you get a lot of pressure on you. And our agency sometimes can be somebody putting that pressure on them unknowingly. So we also have to be really careful with that, using our rescue groups, but making sure we're not overloading them.
Right. And just to be clear, in this case, this gentleman was not a rescue group in any way, shape, or form. It was our organization, our adoption organization was the one that took in the 80 cats over the course of about a week and a half. But to share on that topic, Pasco County, you partner with an incredible number of organizations.
Right.
And so, it's not to say you shouldn't partner with other organizations. You have these like monthly or quarterly meetings with a whole range of transfer partners that you use for the animals that come into your facility, right?
Correct. And that's where, again, where we need to be, cautious and making sure we're utilizing everybody fairly and not overloading one over another, or just because somebody's saying, oh, I can take them, is that really the best interest of the group itself. But we do have a really good open communication with our rescue groups, and a lot of our partners partner with each other. So it's really nice because you have all those avenues that we can use for resources. We're really lucky to have that. And it took some time. We had to put energy into that, but they're an extension of our army, and that's what a lot of rescue groups themselves or shelters don't partner with their people that are in their own backyard. And if you can create a healthy partnership with them, there's nothing better than that, because they're reaching more people, they're educating, they have resources that we may not have, and the list goes on and on. So it is a beautiful relationship when you can create a good, healthy one.
So how do you usually find out about hoarding situations?
And the obvious is going to be, sometimes it's the neighbor of somebody. Sometimes it's a caretaker or another agency that comes in for something unrelated. A lot of times, even on social media, they may be reaching out for something, for some sort of help, and somebody recognizes that something might not be right there. Relatives, that's another big one. And then sometimes, we have a report for a bite or a scratch from an animal, from a cat. We have to follow up with that. So when we go there, we have to be diligent and make sure we see warning signs, giving them the education and resources at that point. Because like you said earlier, that 6-cat case could easily turn into 20, 30, or 40 within a year's time. And one of the most recent cases I got was from a Children and Family Services center locally. And when we went out there, the family was over the moon thrilled, because you sometimes get the folks who don't want you there because they don't know what to expect. But these folks were they were thrilled, and they told me straight out, it started with 3 cats and they just didn't know what happened. And the next thing you know, they have 25 to 35 or more, and they're willing, to accept the help, which we're grateful for, because that's our biggest hurdle, is being able to communicate with somebody, letting them know this is what's best, and that they are working beside you, not against you.
Right. You're teaching them how to handle the situation. You're not telling them that they have failed or that they should be punished or anything like that. You're going in there and you're saying, I have access to some tools and some resources that you might not have access to. So let me help you learn how you can take advantage of these resources, like spay neuter and trapping cats, and, just sort of how to bridge that level of, oh, I don't know what to do. I can't do this. All I know how to do is feed these cats, and there's nothing more that I can do. And let's just let it be. You're offering them another set of options and tools, and partnering with them as almost as equals, understanding that if you need to have authority, you have authority, but you're partnering with them. It's not an enforcement situation for sure. And so, just if you could just share with me a little bit about the process that you go through. Well, actually, before I jump into that question, I want to ask you, in a year's time, on average, how many hoarding situations do you end up having to deal with?
Goodness, again, because we have our indoor-outdoor cases. Right now, I probably have potentially 10 hoarding cases that I'm working on actively, that have come, all day long, all week long. We get these cases that we have to go out and evaluate, and potentially most of them are at risk or have gotten to that level of a hoarding scenario. So it's getting the tools to them as quickly as possible, and if need be, taking them by the hand, but yearly. And again, the cat hoarding cases down here, because it's every 3 months or so, the cats are going back into heat, and then the people are taking in these litters of kittens, and the next thing they're wandering around their house, and then they have these unsterilized cats that turn into those bigger cases. So I don't have an exact number, but I can tell you right now, since the new year, I'm probably working on potentially around 10. Some are smaller, but still, it's manageability. What can that family or individual handle? And are these animals thriving and getting the care that they need? And that's where we're walking on that thin ice, and it's risky.
So I'd like to ask you to walk us through the process of what you go through when you identify a situation. What's that plan that you go through to help them go from here we are, we have this situation, to we're at the end, we're done, and maybe we aren't. Are we ever done? Are we ever closed? So what are those steps we go through with a hoarding situation?
For me, number one, and I think this should be clear for everybody, is gaining the pet owner or hoarder or caretaker, whoever is, overseeing these animals, is gaining their trust. Gaining their trust, like you said earlier, we're equal. I like it to feel like they have some control, and it's on their terms to a degree. Because if they shut the door and we walk away, then we're never going to have anything to work with them, because they are now shut down. So it's the first thing is most important, is gaining the trust of that individual. That would be our main go-to, and telling them that this is the biggest blessing, because a lot of times I walk up and you see them right away, they are shut down because a relative called on them, or it's a retaliation event they feel, And it's letting them know, you might be mad at your neighbor because they called on you, but let me tell you, when we're done, you're going to be thanking them, because this is going to be the biggest blessing you've received. It has nothing to do with them. It's now you and I working this together. And that to me is the most important thing, because then they become like, you build this little family. It's really interesting. And I love it, because there's people for 10 years that we still communicate, and our relationship has evolved, and it started with exactly that, a hoarding scenario, an overwhelmed cat caretaker or colony. So that's for me, my advice, gaining the trust of that individual.
Excellent. So that's the first step. And then what do you do next?
So evaluating the needs. So what are we looking at? Are we looking at a house full of sick, injured animals that need immediate care? Are we looking at, kittens that are not thriving? So where's our layer to this onion of what is our first need that needs to be addressed? So at that point would be always evaluating with them, and then advising, coming up with a plan, potential outcomes. Okay, I'm seeing this. Are they interested in? My thing is making sure that you don't go in there and just take them all away and take them, because at that point, then you have now completely lost the trust of that individual. So you have to do it, depending upon the person, in small increments, or sometimes they just want it over with, and they will keep so many animals so they don't just feel completely lost, but will also ensure that those animals that they're going to keep are receiving medical care, sterilization, so we don't repeat it. So it's priorities of the needs of the animals in the household and the caretaker, because we also have to bring in outside organizations and agencies to provide help for the individual. Can't just be all about the tunnel vision and the animal. And in my career, that's what built this position. We would go out to cases, and I would see, and no disrespect to law enforcement or anybody else, but they have a job to do and they do their job. But at that, and I get it, because there's 100 other things waiting on their plate. But that's where the light bulb went off when I heard other agencies saying, oh, we've been out here 16 times. And nobody said anything about the other, potential issue, meaning the animal event. So that's kind of what built this, was seeing not only the animal need, but the human need on top of it.
So, that's one thing that I think you are lucky in, the fact that since you are a municipal or staff member, you have access to some of those resources. As an individual private rescue that's gone in to help with hoarding situations where those human issues haven't been addressed, is it still within our capabilities as being like a private 501c3? Can we then call in those mental health services for the support for the humans if we're not able to? I mean, we're not trained to do that at all. So
Right.
Can we do that?
And you can, but this is the other pickle. You want to ensure that the people you're working with, that they're open to the help. Because if they're not open to the help, then, there's so many folks that do need help and are willing to receive it. So to add somebody onto the list that is going to not be receptive to it, I hate to say it's a waste of time. It's never a waste of time to try and plant that seed. But yes, an outsider can always call for additional resources. My recommendation for any private rescue folks is building those relationships with your municipal shelters, building those relationships with whatever other resources your county that you're working in or township has to offer, and be knowledgeable about them. Because trust you me, I had no clue about all the resources that are out there that are not animal related, that are human related, that I fall on every day, and they're there to help, with any of the needs that we do need.
So you talked about coordinating and collaborating with other organizations, coordinating or implementation at the property, also working with the clinic and the shelter. So I look at you like the air traffic controller for this whole situation, because you've got moving parts, because you've got semi-pregnant cats, emergency needs for access to the clinic, transport that has to be coordinated, the clinic and shelter scheduling that goes on. What just describe what that whole coordination piece is to you?
Well, it's a one-stop shopping is where I try to make it to be, because for me, adding various folks into the puzzle can make things complicated. Who's doing what, this and that. So it comes down to, like you said, coordinating with your shelter, your medical team to ensure they're on board when they're available, and then starting that momentum and the ball rolling. And if it needs to be that animals are coming in for emergency medical care, well, that's something that we communicate with immediately and get that plan. If it needs to be sterilization services, then we'll schedule that. So we have to remember, sometimes we walk into these cases, and these animals and people have been living like that for a long time. So the initial view and your thought processes, just you want to take everything at that moment, but you also have to be mindful of your priority and the other folks that you're working with. Because what I can load up, 50 cats in my van, but I'm going to take them to the shelter and they're going to not have the ability to give them the care that they need at that time, because why? We didn't communicate, and there was no preparation. So that communication with all of the team members that will be involved on that checklist is crucial. And then also making sure that you schedule these things out, and everybody that needs to be involved is aware of what we're doing and when we're doing it and how it's being done.
In any of your hoarding situations that you've dealt with, how many of them involve removing all of the cats versus having some of those cats go back?
Most cases, the only time all of the cats would be removed would be as if somebody was detained by our local sheriff's department, if there was a death in the family, or they were deemed mentally or medically incapable of taking care of themselves and they're removed from the home. So, or they've lost their home in some scenario. Most of, other than that, it can be baby steps, and it all depends upon how quickly that relationship between myself or whoever's working the case and that caretaker, how quickly that connection is made and their trust is given to you. And you need to make sure you do not break that trust. If you say you're going to do something, you do it, and you do it with I kind of tell them it's on their terms. Sometimes it isn't, but I like them to feel that they do have some control, because I want them, because if you take their control away, then they're going to lose control. And then at that point, we lose any kind of, success with that. So the full removal is really under those specific criteria is how we would keep it.
So let's say we've done the bulk of the project and, ideally 100% sterilization. Some of the cats have gone back. What does monitoring and follow-up look like to you for these situations?
So that's where the difficult part comes into place, because there's such a big community and there's not enough team members to be doing that regular follow-up. Ideally, I would love to be, and I've done this on cases, weekly check-ins, then bi-weekly, then monthly, and you just kind of let it naturally take its place. What I'm trying to see if I could work with is if we can create some sort of like a buddy system with a volunteer program through our human services, community development, and senior services. Because at that point, if there's somebody that they communicate with and that can, like I said, that buddy system really would be helpful because that's what these animals are. They're their buddy, they're their companion. So if there's a human there that can kind of keep that momentum going, it'd be ideal. Are we there yet? No. But do we follow up as best as we can? Absolutely. And I have some success stories where the follow-up has been wonderful. And then I have some I'm not so successful stories, but we can't win them all.
Right.
And that's one is better than none is kind of my scenario.
And there's different scenarios too. Some of the hoarding situations are created by just the population itself exploding. And then others are you get known as the cat rescue person in town.
Yes.
And so you have this like feeding system and coming to you. And that's I think, in my opinion, that's a harder, if I had people calling me all the time saying they need to surrender cats to me, you, you have a hard time saying no, right?
Right.
And so that is the person that I would want to stay really close with and make sure that they feel extremely comfortable with your shelter environment and your programs and your policies, because you want to encourage them to refer people to come to contact your shelter for the
Right.
assistance, and not and retrain the community and say, oh, this is no longer my local rescue person, I'm retraining, and this is where they should be going. And that person I would worry about more than the other scenario.
You're not wrong, because it becomes, how do you say no? And I hear that all the time, and they're getting frustrated because they have nowhere to turn. So then they feel as if they're the last house on the block for a lot of people. And there is a lot of hardship that's going on in just the world today. The economy, things, are a little uncertain. People aren't sure financially if they can sustain whatever they're already having. So when more animals start coming in, they panic. But saying no is sometimes not in our vocabulary. Myself, I have to put boundaries on myself. I know. And I'm grateful that I did, but I try to also talk to the folks like you're talking about, to letting them know and be that support for them to be able to know that they can say no. They
Right.
need to learn how to, it's like, call me, I will be your person. That if, at least it gives that pause where if they have to say, I'm not sure, let me call you back. If you call me, and a solution that's going to involve you, but I want that solution to be where it doesn't land on your plate, where we
Right.
can use the resources that we have in place for that. So then you now feel better. The animal's still getting what they need. And that, so you're not overwhelming yourself, and we have the resources, hopefully. And that's
Right.
another tricky one, is resources when you're dealing with government or municipal shelters.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, there was a study done back in the 90s when an organization, the Animal Rescue League of Boston, became limited admission. And they did a study of the calls for the animals that they turned away to see what the resolution was with regards to those animals. And it was like 90% of the animals had successful outcomes. And then the rest were like owner requested euthanasia, but it was a pretty significant number of like, oh yeah, I got my cousin to take the dog, or I got, so there, just because you're saying no doesn't mean that you're letting that animal down or that cat down. So just to think about that.
Well, one thing, and again, without the criteria for our shelter, with what we do intake when it comes to cats, are considered free roam. We only take in cats to our shelter if they're sick or injured, they've bitten or scratched, they're too young or too old to take care of themselves. Other than that, they are allowed to free roam, and that enforcement of sterilization, because it becomes not my cat, it's a stray I'm feeding. There's different layers to it. But one thing that I did do in 2023 was I kept track of the animals that were diverted from our shelter, but also got very involved in where do these animals go, or how can we help them, still being creative without us going over the criteria we have set. And there's over 700 animals. Now, dogs are included in that, but I'm going to tell you probably 70% of that 700 animal count were cats. And those are animals that had come to me from a rescue or private citizen that needed help. And we, as the community, found resources and an outlet for that animal, and it did not come to the shelter. Healthy, happy, friendly animals don't come to the shelter. We're dealing with sickness and viruses and, a variety, stress and variety of other things that are in our shelter environment. The last place you want a healthy animal to go is the shelter. And that's why we have those boundaries for stray cats, because Florida environment is sustainable for the stray cat, and they consider it like wildlife. So at that point, people need another resource. So we, as the community, or our community here, I believe they've done a wonderful job at finding an alternative and being creative for resources.
So I'm going to ask a loaded question, but I'm sure it's in the back of everybody's mind. Municipalities are usually pretty tight-fisted on their funding. How is this program funded, or how are you funded? And, or, yeah, just how have you negotiated funding for this?
So one of the creative things that we have is our licensing system. So our our cat licenses and our non-sterilized dog licenses, which are required by county ordinance, that money goes into funding for our TMVR pop-up clinics. So that helps us along with certain grants opportunities that we reach out for. So that's about where we're at, is our licensing funding, and our grant opportunities are our big supporters for our programs, our cat TNR programs. Could we always use more? Absolutely. So we're always looking for different and new creative ideas and funding out there for our community.
You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'd like you to take a deeper dive. You talked about, was going to ask you about to share some of your success stories and maybe some cases that might not have worked out so well. And like upon reflection, what could have been done differently?
So let's start with one of our success stories, which I think this is a really great story. And I bring this story up because I kind of touched on different subjects that put this all together. As I mentioned earlier, how I got creative with this was I would go to places, and there would be the EMTs and the sheriff's department, and they would say, oh, we've been here so many times this month already. And they're just kind of standing there because they know it's the same old person, same routine. They know what's going to happen, and they're just waiting for it to take its next step like it always has before. And when our agency showed up at this one home, we noticed this. And I said, if you've been here so many times in the past month, why is the hospital not saying something? Why are the EMTs not saying anything? Why is the sheriff's department? Why is nobody calling us? This woman had 18 cats in her home. She was a disabled senior. And at that point, when she was being taken away from medical care, they contact our agency so we come and remove the animals, because now there's no caretaker for them in the home. So that's how we got called into this one specific call. I guess previously she would either have a caretaker for the cats, or she would deny medical care. So bottom line, long story short, 18 cats, we take in the cats, she goes off for medical care, we keep communicating with her. So I worked out a plan where she would get 3 of the 18 cats back, and they would be fully sterilized, vaccinated, etc. And then the other ones would be taken care of, and we would get them off to our rescue partners, for other adoption services. So the next step was contacting Human Services. So I contacted our Senior and Human Services department, told them all about it. I said, this house could use some help. This woman could use some help. What do we got? About an hour later, they called me up and they said they've never seen a case picked up so quickly. The reason was this individual had 2 previous hoarding cases in counties that were surrounding us. So there was charges and enforcement, etc. So moving from one county to the other, and then moving to our county, so these hoarding cases had followed her. So at that point, when they identified that this individual had previously had hoarding cases, etc., they were so quick to pick this case up. So they came in, they exterminated the house, they defleed, debugged, got it ready. It was about a 3-week process, and we returned the 3 cats back to her. So weekly, we would go there, we would drop off food, we would just talk with her, exchange phone calls, and that went on for about a 6-month period of time. This was about 2.5 years ago. So about 6 months ago, we get a phone call from our Human Services department. This individual was now having to go into an assisted living facility. Guess what? She still only had the 3 cats. And that was something that our whole agency celebrated, because we knew that one case was cleared up in one county. She went to another county, repeated it. That case got cleared up, and there came to our county, she repeated it. So now here we were 2 years later for somebody who was repeating, which they say it's 100% recidivism for hoarding if there isn't any kind of intervention. So do I say, oh, that little intervention that we did for about that 6-month time frame fixed it? Oh, no. Did it help? Yes. And I just think maybe she was getting a little bit older and slowed down was part of it. But I also like to take our agency's credit a little bit and say, hey, we did do something a little bit different, a little more unique, which I think had to play a part in it. So that was a really nice success story. The other one of the ones that I see that when we don't have success is when there's failure to communicate, where we have a case that we were working on for some time. We have brought in some other agencies that said they were going to do a certain part. They didn't. We didn't follow up. The communication failed. The pet owner or the caretakers start to go back to or never left their old behaviors. So that's one of the things that we need to be more available for our community when we're working these cases, and really keep it close to home, because when we think, oh, so and so is going to take care of it, and then it doesn't get taken care of and we don't find out until months later, I think that was where we failed there. But what happens is we have an explosion, we all run to that explosion, and then when the fire simmers, another explosion happens. So we tear off thinking, oh, they're going to finish that. And again, they have their own fires that they're trying to put out on top of what we may ask them to help. So I think that's where seeing things through to the very end and always staying open and communicating with any parties you bring in and the people that you're working with as far as the pet owners, that's the most important thing. And that's when I see it become, where we see room for failure there. But it's also room for growth.
Yeah, growth and opportunity for sure.
Right.
And it's funny, I'm sitting here thinking, and I used to always think about this too, with New England in being in the fact that we don't have kittens in the wintertime and that kind of thing. So it's like, spay day is in February. And I'm like, well, you know what? That should be like any hoarding situation it should be national check-in with your, hoarding month or whatever, and I mean, I say that a little freshly, but I mean it, which is like whenever your organization has like a quiet period, and who has a quiet period, right? Who says that? But like there should be a check-in time, like where we like do a check-in when your resources might be more available. For me, July is not the time to be dealing with a high volume cat situation. I know you say you've got kitten season year round, but as the days are shorter, the breeding season is a little bit impacted. So, so you may say to me that right now you are just as busy as you'd be in July, which you can certainly tell me that you would be the same, or
no,
is it different?
We're not. It's definitely different.
Right. And so then with that being said, then, identify certain times of the year where we would be able to focus some efforts on our supportive care, basically, programs, and not try to be proactive instead of being reactive. I guess that's where I'm going. And so, with that being said, is there a way to identify like near hoarders, or maybe we do go out in February and do big spay neuter campaigns and trying to find those people who have those 6 cats that are not spayed yet. How do we identify them? How do we get them before they get in trouble?
And that is the key, like you're saying, is number one is identifying them, because a lot of it's going on behind closed doors. And especially because, again, and I keep bringing this up, and I'm sorry, but with living in the state of Florida, what is Florida known for? What was it known for? The retirement community. So mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, they moved down here, families up north or elsewhere, they're getting that once a week phone call. Oh, we're doing fine. Everything's great. But they hang up the phone and there's what's going on in the home. So that's the key, is identifying. Because I have family members that either live 10 minutes away from their family member who is creating a hoarding scenario and they don't know, or 10 hours and they don't know. So it's that identifying, like you're saying, and it comes through the oddest of ways. Sometimes I don't want to say they're telling on themselves, they're looking for help because they just one day realize that there's a problem. So that's again the big important key, is staying close with our rescue communities, because they're going to call somebody they see on social media a lot quicker than they're going to call the local, animal control. and say, I've got this problem. So it's educating our rescue community so they can pull me in, and then they're more, that army just grows from there. So it's various ways we get identified these hoarding
Yeah.
or potential hoarding.
Yeah, and I thought about it too, like organizations like Meals on Wheels, and like making sure that they're armed with information about access to spay neuter, because those folks, when they're dropping off those meals, they see a lot, I'm sure.
Oh,
And
yes.
and so, even, and if there's something even a little bit, I mean, we've tried, there are some Meals on Wheels that will provide pet food with the human meals, but then there are other situations where they don't want to schlep all the food and all that kind of stuff. But I think that there are going to be more overlayered ways that we can get our assistance into the network, I guess, more readily than maybe we have so far.
Well, one of the things that we've done, and I really love it, is we do a monthly pet food giveaway event where it's identified areas of need. So if we know that there's, maybe more of a low income area, a homeless community, seniors that don't have transportation, we want to go somewhere that's like center of that type of stuff that's going on. So when they come out and they see you there, they they get face to face talk to you, and then they start telling you, hey, my neighbor this, or I have so many of this going on. Where can I get help? And I think that's where you start to build some bonds too, because you're out in the community and you're giving back. You're walking beside them. And so you're not coming to them, they're coming to you. And that's kind of turned the tables a little bit. I get a lot of good information at these events, and it's such a positive, there's just no dollar sign on that piece that you get when you get to see somebody smiling because they can feed their pet.
All right. Well, thank you for answering those questions. I have questions from the group, so we're now going to turn to questions from the crowd. And so, general question. So we have new ACOs with no experience. Head ACO runs municipal shelter, was a detective in the police department, city police department. What are the top 2 resources you'd recommend for learning about cats, cat sheltering, TNR, and spay neuter?
Oh, goodness. Well, first of all, do they have any kind of a TNR program that they've implemented in their county would be important to know. And if they don't know, if they don't have that they should be implementing one. Also, what I really like, I think is really important, and I don't know where this is coming from, I think reaching out to an organization that has or a successful TNR program going, that they bounce ideas off of them and say, hey, what works for you? Can you maybe come out and share with us what you do and how you're doing it? Because there's your model. If it's already working somewhere else, then you just tweak it to what your needs are. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody who is interested in need of any resources, ideas, creativity. That is like where my heart is.
Great, excellent. And I can get everybody in touch with, folks in touch with Stella if you just email me, and I know everybody's got my email out there. We are a small TNR group in a county that doesn't work with cats at all. When we run into these large cases of indoor tame cats, we have to bring them into our care piecemeal and try to transfer them into a nonprofit shelter as we can, which can take up to months. We're seeing an increase in these situations, which is truly alarming. We're trying to grow our network of partner rescues, but what do you recommend? Our neighboring counties cannot help.
County commissioners going to those higher ups in the county to see and letting them know what the needs are, because if they don't know about it, they're not going to be, if they can't identify it, how are they going to put in any kind of solutions for these issues? So that's where I would suggest, and or speaking to your directors of the shelter that is in your county to find out, hey, we're seeing an increase in this. That's, like you said earlier, proactive instead of being reactive, because you're never going to get ahead of it. So trying to reduce it as best as you can, as early as you can, is going to be your key.
Yeah, and I will say it's very different all around the country. So where you've got a municipal shelter down in Florida, there are very few municipal shelters in New England and New York area. They do not. Most of the cat animal welfare is done with private organizations. And so I definitely know there's a lot of scenarios with folks in New England where they're taking like 8 cats out every month. My focus would be actually doing a mass trapping, getting everybody spayed and neutered, doing what you can do to put as many cats back in the home if possible, with ongoing support and maintenance, and then pulling those, because you've got to stop the reproducing ASAP. That's like issue number one. Then issue number two is then funneling them into an adoption venue, or whatever the best, whatever we call them now, pathways, the best pathway possible for those cats. But I would say, this is what I did in the 90s with cats that were like friendly, that we wanted to be able to bring in and put up for adoption. I said the room at the inn cats, right? So I would TNR them in the summertime, and I'd bring them in December, and I'd put them up for adoption then. So what I would do, I just would want to get the spay neuter. And in some cases, if you do that too, then people will say, oh, well, now that the cat's spayed or neutered, my uncle wants to take one of these cats. Or, there might be other adoption pathways for those cats. Their marketability becomes a lot more valuable when they're spayed and neutered and they've got their shots. I hate to say it, but that's the reality. And so if you invest the spay neuter into those cats, they might be able to find a positive outcome that's different than having to go through a whole rescue shelter process. It's less clean and tidy, but it does stop the insanity of the kittens being born. Okay, more questions here. What is one thing you wish small rescues adopters would do differently now to help these situations from even developing in the first place?
What is one thing? I'm sorry, it broke up a second.
One thing that small rescues adopters would do differently now to help these situations from even developing in the first place. And I'm not sure if this person, are you referring to, I'm actually going to ask for some clarification. Are you referring for like shelters and rescues that are getting out of control with their own population, or something else? So Jane, if you could expand on that would be really great. So I'm going to skip over that one. Julie's asking for tips on catching the last cats on the property. You want to go on that one, Stella?
Oh, and that's where it's becomes that battle. I know that it depends upon the cat, and that's really what it comes to. They train us. I am a firm believer the cats, that they train us. So it's getting to know those cats, and if you have a caretaker or feeder they can build that trust with them. I'm a big believer in the dog crate. So if you're having difficulty in a wire dog crate, if you can somehow lure them into that over time with trust, because it's not as scary. It all depends. Catnip, I know people that have used that, but yeah, it's isolating those specific cats from the already sterilized cats to be able to get them into the trap, and that can be tricky. And it just depends upon that cat. I know, Stacy, you're real successful with those events. What do you say?
Yeah, so the drop trap, you can even use the drop trap in the house. And then also, obviously, you can try and, so it depends. I mean, if you've got cats living in the walls and in the ceilings, that's a different type of thing. Then you're putting cameras up in there and you're trying to track with cameras to find out, where everybody is and where the cats are. There was another scenario. Kristen, you're going to have to help me. I don't think it was the drop trap video, but there was a Brian Cordes video on how to catch, like a house feral situation. So, and I have this vision of it. So we'd have to look that up, but I might have been in the drop trap, but it might have been in one of his other presentations. But again, I think that it depends on the cat. Obviously the dog crate, the wire dog crate is great especially if there's specific foods and baits that the cats like. You certainly don't want anybody grabbing at the cats with the gloves on, the netting and all that kind of stuff. No owner of any cat wants to see that, especially if you are emotionally sensitive, wants to see sort of a rough handling situation. Obviously, if it's a situation where you've got time, like it's a condemned property. I mean, there was another situation in a town in Massachusetts, and it was condemned because of there was cats and rats in the house, and rats like digging underneath the house, and the foundation was just the integrity. So the house was like at risk of falling down basically. So with that situation, that was just everybody had to get moved out, and that was being done as fast as possible, trying to keep the people as safe as possible. So again, it depends on the scenario, but really just trying to do anything to get the containment space smaller, that kind of thing, and just work them down and get them into that squeeze cage. So
Yeah, in a home environment, like you were saying, great. Our thing is we do deal with a lot of large outdoor environments cases. So that part can be even worse because they're everywhere.
Right.
So in the home environment, yeah, exactly. You nailed it with
Right.
making the isolation area smaller and smaller for the cat.
Right. Outdoors is, I would go to the drop trap right away. I would use the drop trap. I mean, a lot of trappers, that's the only thing that they use now is the drop trap. So I would certainly just go that route and work from there. So for outdoor cats. And Dawn Binefield Indie Neighborhood Cats wrote a great blog post on mass trapping and on how to work a mass trapping project. And if you just go to the communitycatspodcast.com website and search mass trapping, I believe her blog post will come up. It's actually one of our most popular blog posts, and it's got a great process of how to go through a mass trapping process, which is very similar to this type of scenario too. It's sort of got the same feel to it, same issues. There are requests out there, Stella, that we put together a checklist of items based on our conversation today. So we might do that from the transcript or something, sort of the checklist of how to go through some of these and some of the suggestions. And so we might do that. Looking at some of our final questions. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. But there's one thing. I think this is Jane clarifying her question. So she's saying here, obviously there are different factors in each hoarding situation, but is there one thing you see a lot that you think, I wish the rescue group had done XYZ earlier, besides spay neuter before adoption, that might make a difference in reducing the number of hoarding households in the future?
Education for the community, resources for the community, knowing that what somebody can do if they're looking into, like, if this is something that they're experiencing, so they have outlets that they can go to and get these resources.
Excellent. All right. Cool. I think Kristen's putting some resources out there. I think we are at just about, my computer's running out of juice, so yeah. So anyway, but this was great. I think we're at the end of the questions anyway. Stella, this was a great conversation. I truly appreciate your time. I just looking out the window of your truck there. It looks like it's a beautiful day in Florida. So thank you so much for spending a little bit of time in the shade here. And I had a wonderful time hanging out with you one afternoon about a year ago or so. That was a lot of fun. And, it sounds like that's more like your everyday life, not like once in a while. So,
yeah, and we're still working on that case, that one you came out with. We got everything completed, and then there was some changes in the health of the caretaker. So we were always, but again, that was a year ago. We still keep the communication open with those parties because that's important.
Yeah, that was beautiful colony of cats. They're just very cute, all black cats, 34 cats or something like that, and they were all black except for maybe one or two.
You got 42 total out of there.
Wow. Yeah. So, and you know what? It started out because the woman across the street passed away, right?
Yep. And then they just migrated over there, and resources. They lived on water. They had some woods. So that's the resource for the cats. And then the next thing, there's kittens. And then, we start feeding them, and then it just explodes.
Right. And they just didn't realize or think about it. And then you hit a tipping point.
A lot of people, they look for resources, but they just don't find the right person or the right connection, and they just give up. And I can't say I can blame them, but what do you do at that point? And if you don't have the resources yourself financially, you're out of luck.
Right. Exactly. And I can't tell you how many times I get it still with the Community Cats podcast, and we used to get this at the Merrimack River Feline Rescue Society. One of my big beefs was, I don't care if we have like the perfect answer, but we call everybody back. We call everybody back because when I call people back even from the podcast and say it's somebody like a couple of days ago, I got something like, I'm in North Carolina, I've got a cat that I need to relocate or something like that. And I call them back and they're like, oh, you've called me back. This is great.
Yes.
And I'm like,
Yep.
I'm in Vermont. And then there's like the pregnant pause. And I'm like, but let me do some internet searches here. Do you have the internet? And they're like, well, no, do you want me to do some searches for you and give you some phone numbers? Oh, that would be great. And so even just a little bit of help, you know, makes people feel grateful. So it's, at the end of the day, even if you say, I don't know, but I can try and find out, or, I don't know, maybe try here, at least call people back, and you can at least, they want to be heard. They want to be listened to and understand and say, you know what, you're not the only person that has these struggles. So stay with it, stay persistent, because you're not the only person faced with this challenge. And so that
Gives them hope when you call them back, and it keeps the momentum. The more times they don't get a call back or they just get told no, the more they lose that faith in that there's any kind of resource for them. So then they give up.
Right. Exactly. And if if there is no resource, we encourage them to create it on their own, right? That's why we're here. We were here because we
Creativity.
thought something that needed to happen, and we couldn't get it, so we created it.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being part of this and for everything that everybody is doing out there. And again, I am available. If there's any questions that are needed, resources, I have no problems helping out, because that's what it's about. It's sharing the knowledge.
Excellent. All right, Stella, thank you so very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a beautiful day.